With the previous architects, we talked about Hagia Sophia and how the two architects were trying to create a supernatural space by creating a sense of weightlessness through the decorations and the layout of the building. This weightlessness is created by using the pendentives that translates the weight to the four corners and then opening up the walls between those buttresses, those piers, and then covering them with colored marble down below and glowing gold mosaics up above. Adding, and there's the pendentive scheme that we saw in the previous screencasting. Adding to the sense of the supernatural is the incredible complexity of the interior space. The center dome, which really sits on a square, opens up on the ends, as you can see here in the middle, here as well, opens up to a half dome on either end. And these half domes, so here's our dome, here's our half dome, each of them then opens up to three more smaller half domes down below. And what we end up having inside as we look at Hagia Sophia is a sort of cascading space that pushes outward, pushes further outward here. We can see it here as well. So that we have this incredibly complex and interpenetrating space. The nave, for example, pushes out into the aisles, both at the gallery level here on the right and on the left we can see down below at the main level. So that you can stand in the aisle but look across through a part of the nave that pushes really into the aisle. You can see straight across and straight through. This incredibly complex and interpenetrating space. Now, this complex space would be used by later artists to lay out a very complex series of mosaic decorations that were meant to be experienced as you move through the church. With this art fix, we will look at these mosaic decorations and how they were laid out. Unfortunately, the church at Daphne, the monastery at Daphne, is very, very badly damaged and is currently under restoration, so it's difficult to find terrific pictures of it. Some of them are a little bit lower than the standard we've become used to. Now, as you can see, though, it still has this complex space of a dome resting on lower half domes on the sides and really extending outward to a series of spaces that interpenetrate through the entire church. And originally, these would all have been covered with different mosaic decorations, depending on where you are in the church. As we can see, the highest part of the church, the top of the uppermost door, is meant to be a metaphor for heaven. And this idea of a dome as heaven is something we've seen again and again. We have to think back, for example, to the Parthenon, or even to the roofs of some of the catacombs, to think about this circle as a metaphor for heaven itself. And here in it, we see this mosaic of Christ holding the book of life in his hand, his other hand caught mid-gesture as if he's about to proclaim something. Other half domes also represent heaven. Here, immediately over the apse, we have the Virgin Mary with Christ on her lap. This is directly over the altar down below. I couldn't find a better picture of it for you than that. But both of these suggest the heavenly realm. And both of them are based on icons. Christ is here, the Pantocrator, the judge of all mankind at the end of time. He's holding the book of life where the names of the saved are inscribed, and he is about to proclaim whether you, looking up, are in that book or not. He looks a little upset, a little angry almost, because in fact he is the judge of the earth. The image over the altar is a Theotokos image, the Virgin Mary as the bearer of divinity on her heavenly throne. So again, both of these highest elements of the church are intended to be representations of heaven. As you might imagine, then, as we come down the walls, the lower walls closer to the earth show us Christ on earth. Here, for example, we see the Annunciation. This is where the angel announces to the Virgin Mary that she will bear Christ. You'll notice that she sort of looks toward us, and the angel looks toward her. But the way that the artist has arranged them in this corner, they actually look out at each other across our space, just like Justinian and his wife Theodora. Look at them, look at each other in San Vitale. There's something about Byzantine art that's very much based on interaction. The idea that the images occupy the same space that you do, that the person in the image is truly there where you are. And I think this kind of is based on that on a certain level. The angel looks out across our space to announce across the corner that Mary will bear Christ. It's not existing within pictorial space, but in real space. As we move our way around these corners, you can see that the artist is very good about using that odd quarter domed space in the corner here. So Christ in the grotto here at his birth, the Nativity, is in the deepest hole of the corner. And Joseph, the father of Christ, who's not really the father of Christ, the stepfather of Christ, looks over his shoulder and is sort of alienated from the scene. If he looks back to see the baby Christ there, to witness this and wonder how this actually happened. And the shepherds coming to worship Christ out further still. They look again toward him, down deep inside the cave, just as he's deep inside the corners. Here we see the Transfiguration, where toward the end of his life, Christ appears in his earthly glory to his apostles. And again, he's in the deepest corner where the beams of his holy presence spread out to the apostles as they're arranged around the circumference, and literally seems to beam across our space to them. So what we're saying is, from heaven up above, we move our way toward the earthly life of Christ on the expanses down below. And as we look at these, one of the things that we'll find is that they're not arranged chronologically. In fact, they're stuffed everywhere throughout. Some of them are images of saints, but some of them are narrative scenes as well. And they're not arranged chronologically. In other words, you can't simply follow the narrative by moving from one to the next around the center. Some of them adapt the use of the space quite well. For example, in the area before you actually enter the church, the narthex outside, we have images of people who have either been banished from the sanctuary, such as Joachim, just before the angel tells him that his wife Mary will give birth, or excuse me, Anna will give birth to the Virgin Mary. That takes place outside the main body of the church. Other scenes can be related to preparing yourself for entering the church, for coming in. Still others are arranged in a way that you have to actually wander around the church to follow the narrative. You can't stand in one place and move logically from one to the next. You have to search for and find it, and thus walk your way around. In other words, your experience of the mosaics becomes kind of like a mini pilgrimage where you go to the Holy Land. We're also there. You can't follow the sites chronologically. You have to go from one place to the next and then put it all back together in your mind. This is very interactive and very typical of Byzantine art. In this scene of the crucifixion, we see Christ on the cross, looking out at us, but really toward his mother, the Virgin Mary, who has been weeping, her eyes tired and sad, her face glum as she gestures up toward Christ. John the Evangelist on the right looking out toward us with his hand in reverence. Christ bleeds profusely from the cross, but it's very schematically rendered. The blood that flows from his side falls in this sort of perfect arc that leads out. His hands drip down. And then the blood at his feet, a little bit more realistically, swirls its way down and ends up dripping onto this skull down below. Much of this can be found described in the Bible. Certainly the Virgin and John the Evangelist were there when Christ was crucified. He says to her at one point, "Behold your son," which seems to be the moment we have here. But other bits are added in order to add to the subject of it. We have angels up above with their hands gesturing toward him, And the skull down below, with the blood dripping on it, can be explained in one of two different ways. First, it certainly is intended to be a symbol for the place where Christ was crucified. The Mount of Calvary was also known as Golgotha, which is, I believe, Aramaic for the place of the skull. So the skull certainly relates to that. It was an old graveyard where Christ was crucified. But furthermore, the way the blood drips directly on its head, you notice it makes a little cross as it hits his head. This is about the saving power of the blood of Christ, according to Christian theology. And also according to Christian mythology through the Middle Ages, it was believed that Christ's crucifixion and the graveyard of Golgotha is the place where Adam was buried. And so the skull becomes a symbol of the original sin, the sin of Adam, that the blood of Christ covers. So again, these mosaics that appeared in churches are not only there for decoration, they're certainly there to engage with and help you to better understand the Christian mysteries. And as you wander your way around the church, trying to follow the narrative, which again is broken up, disjointed, each one of them allows you to stop and think about the image that we see in front of us and its meaning for our own